the story of a crime, not criminology.
Yeah. Strong words. So let's dive in. Unveiling the creature. The secret genesis of the Federal Reserve.
Okay, so let's start with this riddle the source throws right at us. It says the Federal Reserve System is not federal.
Right.
It possesses no reserves.
Hmm.
And its banks are not even banks. I mean, that's that's a pretty bold claim. How can something so central to our economy be described like that in such, contradictory terms?
It's confusing, right? And that's kind of the point the author makes. This is where the detective story really kicks off.
Okay.
The key, according to the source, isn't right at the start, like you'd expect. It's actually in the middle of the story. You have to look at its inception, how it was born.
The origin story.
Exactly. It's less like a curriculum you just learn,
Yeah.
and more like, a mystery you have to solve.
Yeah.
And the answers are, well, they're pretty eye-opening.
Okay, that sets the stage. And the setup for the Fed, it really does sound like something out of a movie, almost cinematic.
It really does.
Our source describes, and this is quite a quote, a party of the nation's greatest bankers stealing out of New York on a private railroad car under cover of darkness.
Whoa.
Stealthily hieing hundreds of miles south, embarking on a mysterious launch, sneaking onto an island deserted by all but a few servants, living there a full week under such rigid secrecy that the names of not one of them was once mentioned.
A whole week?
Yeah. Lest the servants learn the identity and disclose to the world the strangest, most secret expedition in the history of American finance. I mean, why? Why that level of secrecy for what was supposedly just a meeting about banking reform?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the reason for all that cloak and dagger stuff, according to the source, was actually pretty simple and revealing.
Okay.
If it had gotten out, publicly, that these big rival bankers were all meeting together secretly, the public would have immediately thought, wait a minute, are they plotting something? Like an agreement in restraint of trade? A cartel, basically?
Which is illegal.
Exactly. And the author says, well, that's precisely what they were doing.
Sure.
Frank Vanderlip, who was there, he was president of the National City Bank of New York at the time, he actually wrote later that their secret expedition to Jekyll Island was, and this is his words, the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System.
So he admitted it, the birthplace.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And the secrecy measures were intense. They were told, don't eat together before you leave. Show up at the station one by one.
Wow.
Slip onto Senator Aldrich's private train car. And once they were on board, no last names. First names only.
Just Paul, Nelson, Benjamin.
Exactly. Like you said, straight out of a spy thriller. It was, well, the source calls it a conspiracy.
Okay, so who are these architects? Who is in that secret meeting on Jekyll Island?
Right, the architects of the creature. There were 7 men, and they represented like the absolute peak of global finance at the time, either directly or, indirectly.
The big players.
Oh, yeah. We're talking the major banking groups. Morgan, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Warburg, Kuhn Loeb. It was a powerhouse group.
So who specifically?
Okay, let's list them. You had Senator Nelson W. Aldrich, big political figure, but also grandfather of Nelson Rockefeller, son-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr., plus connections to Cecil Rhodes' secret society, a very connected guy.
Okay.
Then Henry P. Davison. He was a senior partner at J.P. Morgan.
Morgan interests represented?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Charles D. Norton, president of the First National Bank of New York, another big hitter.
Got it.
AP had Andrew. He was assistant secretary of the Treasury then. So government connection right there. Frank A. Vanderlip, we mentioned him, president of National City Bank of New York, representing William Rockefeller.
Rockefeller interests.
Check. Then, a really key figure, Benjamin Strong. He was head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And he later became, a super powerful head of the Fed itself.
Foreshadowing.
You could say that. And finally, Paul M. Warburg, partner in Kuhn Loeb and Company, representing the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France.
Rothschilds.
And get this, his brother, Max Warburg, was head of the Warburg Banking Group in Germany and a director of the Reichsbank.
The German central bank.
The very one. The one that later, oversaw that massive hyperinflation in Germany.
Wow. Okay.
And Paul Warburg himself, he was a huge advocate for a central bank here in America. He'd been writing pamphlets, pushing the idea, laying the groundwork, basically.
So it's fascinating. These guys, they were often fierce competitors, right?
Yeah.
In the banking world.
Oh, absolutely. Cutthroat.
Yeah. But the source says they were driven together by one overriding desire to fight their common enemy. So who or what was this common enemy? And what challenges were they trying to tackle by teaming up like this?
That really is the critical question. Why bury the hatchet and meet in secret?
Yeah.
The source points to a few major threats that were really undermining their control, their dominance of finance.
Okay. Like what?
Well, first, the rise of smaller banks. These rival banks were gaining ground. By 1913, the source says non-national banks held something like 57% of all bank deposits.
That's a lot.
It is. So the big players felt they needed to stop this competition to regain control. That was threat number one.
Okay. What else?
Second, there was this trend of private capital formation. Basically, industries were starting to fund their own growth using their profits.
Instead of borrowing from the big banks.
Exactly. Less borrowing meant less business for them, less control. This is happening because interest rates were market-driven, and the money supply was tied to gold, limiting things.
So less reliance on loans.
Right. And the third big threat, maybe the most immediate one, was the constant fear of bank runs.
Ah, yes. The classic fear.
Yeah. And currency drains. In a fractional reserve system, which they were all operating under, banks promise to pay out more money than they actually have in the vault.
Right. They create money through loans.
Precisely. So if too many depositors suddenly demanded their money back a bank run, or if other banks demanded payment of currency drain, it could expose the fact that they were basically insolvent.
A house of cards.
That's how the source portrays it.
Yeah.
These were the ticking time bombs they were desperately trying to figure out how to defuse.
Okay, so those are the threats. What were their specific goals then at this secret Jekyll Island meeting? What was the plan?
They hammered out a cartel agreement. The source identifies 5 key objectives they were aiming for.
Okay, let's hear them.
Number 1, stop the competition. Put the brakes on those smaller banks and make sure control over the nation's money stayed with, well, the people in that room.
Consolidate power.
Pretty much. Number 2, get a money creation franchise. Basically, get the legal right, sanctioned by the government, to create money out of nothing, just so they could lend it out.
Formalize the fractional reserve system.
And expand it, yeah. Number 3, control the reserves. Pool all the bank's reserves, which were actually pretty small individually, into one big central pot.
To protect against those runs and drains we talked about.
Exactly. A safety net, but controlled by them. Number 4, and this is crucial, socialize the losses. Meaning, get the taxpayers to foot the bill when the cartel's bets went bad, when losses inevitably happened.
Wow. Okay, heads they win, tails the public loses.
That's the implication. And finally, number 5, public deception. They needed to sell this whole thing to Congress and the public. By convincing everyone that this cartel agreement, this central bank plan, was all about protecting the public interest and creating economic stability.
A PR campaign, basically.
A massive one, built on a foundation of, well, misdirection, according to the source.
So what does this all mean? They realized they couldn't achieve these 5 goals on their own. They needed help, an ally.
Yes, precisely. That was the big conclusion they reached on Jekyll Island. The bankers couldn't just do this themselves. They needed a partner.
And who would that partner be?
The politicians. They figured they had to go into partnership with the government.
Ah.
And the structure for this partnership, this banker-politician cartel, had to be a central bank.
The Federal Reserve.
That's what it became. And this structure, the source argues, was designed from the ground up to achieve those 5 secret objectives, not the ones they told the public about. That's the core argument about the Fed's true nature. 2, deconstructing the grand illusion, the true nature of money.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about money itself. The source opens this whole discussion by calling money a grand illusion. That's such a striking phrase. How can money, the dollars in our pockets, the numbers in our bank accounts, how can that be an illusion?
It's a fundamental question, isn't it? And the source points out that, hey, even economists kind of struggle to agree on a precise definition of money.
Right.
But for the purposes of this analysis, it sets up a working definition. It traces money back, from its simplest forms, like barter, to the really complex system we have now. And the illusion part really comes in when money gets disconnected from anything tangible, anything with real intrinsic value.
Like gold.
Exactly. Historically, the move away from just trading goods for goods, barter, happened when some commodities became widely accepted. Eventually, precious metals, especially gold and silver, became the preferred form of money.
Why them specifically?
Because of the human effort involved. It takes a lot of work, a lot of labor, to find gold, dig it out of the ground, refine it. That effort gives it intrinsic value.
Okay.
And that intrinsic value made gold and silver stable measures of value over long periods. Now, the argument you always hear today against gold is, well, there just isn't enough of it for modern commerce, right?
Yeah.
For our huge global economy.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. It's too scarce.
Right. But the source just dismisses that idea completely, calls it, and I quote, one of the most childish ideas imaginable.
Wow, okay. Why?
It points out that something like 45% of all the gold ever mined in history is sitting in government vaults or bank stockpiles.
45%.
Yeah. And another 30% or so is in jewelry, ornaments, private hoards. So the idea that it's physically scarce in a way that prevents it from being money, the source says that's just not accurate. It's being hoarded, not used.
That's a different perspective.
Right.
The source also uses this really simple analogy to explain what happens when money isn't tied to something real, like gold. It says, imagine a game, like Monopoly maybe, where you just double the amount of money everyone has, but you don't add any more properties to the board. What happens?
Prices just double, right?
Yeah.
Boardwalk costs twice as much.
Exactly. And this isn't just a game theory thing, is it? This is inflation.
Precisely. That little analogy perfectly illustrates the classic mechanism of inflation. When you expand the money supply, print more money, create more digital dollars without a matching increase in actual goods and services.
Yeah.
The value, the purchasing power of each dollar goes down. Things cost more dollars, but the real value hasn't changed. The quoted price goes up, but the real price, how much effort it takes to get something or its price relative to other things, stays the same.
So it's the money becoming worth less.
Exactly. The value of the money drops. And this leads right into what the source calls natural law number 1.
Which states?
It states, long-term price stability is possible only when the money supply is based upon the gold or silver supply without government interference.
Strong claim.
Very. The idea is that the free market, when based on something real like gold, which requires real effort to obtain, automatically regulates prices and keeps things stable over time. Government interference, especially creating money out of thin air, messes that up.
And this ties into why some people see gold as, like, a check on government power.
Absolutely. The source actually quotes Alan Greenspan.
Yeah.
Is that Alan Greenspan, writing back in 1966.
Before he was Fed chair.
Way before. And he said, quote, the abandonment of the gold standard made it possible for the welfare statists to use the banking system as a means to an unlimited expansion of credit.
Wow. Greenspan said that.
He did. It highlights this fundamental conflict. A limited, sound money supply versus a government that wants unlimited funds for its programs, especially, welfare programs or warfare. Gold forces discipline. That's why the source calls gold the enemy of the welfare state.
Okay, so how did we get from gold-backed money to this grand illusion? What was the process?
It started subtly with goldsmiths way back when. People would deposit their gold coins with the goldsmith for safekeeping.
Makes sense. Safer than under the mattress.
Right. And the goldsmith would issue a receipt.
Yeah.
These receipts then started circulating as money because people trusted they could redeem them for the actual gold. They were 100% backed. Honest money, basically.
Okay, seems straightforward. Where did it go wrong?
Here comes the secret science, as the source calls it, or maybe the dark art of fractional reserve banking.
Uh-oh.
The goldsmiths noticed, hey, not everyone comes back for their gold at the same time. Most of it just sits here in the vault.
Right. People use the receipts instead.
Exactly. So the goldsmiths thought, what if we issue more receipts than the gold we actually have? We can lend these extra receipts out and charge interest.
Creating money out of nothing.
Precisely. The original depositor still had the receipt thinking their gold was safe, but now a borrower also had a receipt representing a claim on that same gold. The money supply was artificially expanded. Those receipts became fractional money, only partly backed by real gold.
And the source argues that this fractional money, it always leads somewhere worse.
Yes, it says fractional money always degenerates into pure fiat money. It's presented as this inevitable slide.
My inevitable.
Because the temptation is always there to reduce the fraction, right? To issue more and more receipts or loans based on less and less real backing. The smaller that fraction gets, the closer you are to fewer fiat money that exists only because the government says it's money. No backing at all.
Just decreed into existence.
Exactly. And the source points to historical examples. Take the Bank of England, founded way back in 1694.
Okay.
England was broke after lots of wars. Couldn't raise taxes anymore, couldn't borrow easily because the king has defaulted before. So the Bank of England was created not really for monetary stability, but, as the source puts it, to provide means outside the onerous sources of taxes and public loans for the financial requirements of an impecunious government.
A way for the government to get money without directly taxing or borrowing transparently.
Precisely. A hidden money machine. The bank would buy government bonds and just create currency to pay for them. Poof. Money for the government.
And how did that work out?
Well, just 2 years later, in 1696, a law was passed allowing the bank to suspend payment in specie, meaning they didn't have to give people gold back if they asked for it. They were legally protected from honoring their own promises.
Wow. So the backing was gone, essentially.
Pretty much right from the start. And the source argues this act doomed the British economy to a nauseating roller coaster ride of inflation, booms, and busts. Because why not keep creating money if it costs nothing to make and you don't have to redeem it? Attempts to control it later, like the Peel Act in 1844, they failed. The fundamental mechanism of creating money from nothing was too tempting, too powerful. 3. The Federal Reserve's record. Booms, busts, and bailouts.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the Federal Reserve, established in 1913. The source is, well, it's brutal in assessing its track record.
Uncompromising is a good word for it.
It claims the Fed has presided over the crashes of 1921 and 1929, the Great Depression of 29 to 39, recessions in 53, 57, 69, 75, and 81, a stock market Black Monday in 87.
Quite a list.
And a 1,000% inflation, which has destroyed 90% of the dollar's purchasing power. I mean, that's a stunning indictment, especially when the Fed's official goals are things like, full employment, stable prices, economic growth.
Right. Things it seems to have consistently failed at, according to this analysis.
So what does this dismal record, as the source calls it, what does it imply about the Fed itself? It feels like the author isn't just saying the Fed made mistakes.
No, not at all. The argument is much deeper than that. The source contends that this consistent failure to achieve its public goals points to a fundamental, maybe uncomfortable truth.
Which is?
That those were never its true objectives.
Wow. So the stated goals were just cover.
That's the assertion, that the Fed isn't really a public institution working for the public good. Instead, it's merely a cartel with a government facade.
A cartel, like the one formed on Jekyll Island.
Exactly. Now, the source concedes the people running it don't want to crash the whole economy, obviously. They don't want to kill the goose that lays such beautiful golden eggs.
Right. They need the system to function, to profit from it.
But, and this is the crucial point, when there's a conflict between what's good for the public and what's good for the cartel's private interests, the source says the public will be sacrificed. That is the nature of the beast. It argues it's just naive to expect a cartel to behave any other way. Its primary loyalty is to its members, not the public.
Okay. And a key part of how this cartel operates, according to the source, is something called the game called bailout. How does that work? How do banks play this game?
Right, the bailout game. It starts, the source explains, with the Fed allowing commercial banks to create checkbook money out of nothing.
Yeah.
We touched on this, the Mandrake mechanism.
Creating loans, basically.
Yeah. And banks make profit by lending this easily created money out and collecting interest on it. But this whole system has that built-in ticking time bomb, the fractional reserves.
Right. More promises to pay than actual money in the vault.
Exactly. So what happens when some of those loans inevitably go bad? A borrower defaults.
The bank loses money.
Well, not necessarily. See, the bank can't easily just write off that bad loan, because doing so reduces its assets and could reveal its own insolvency, wiping out the owner's equity.
Okay, so what do they do?
The first move is often to roll over the loan. Pretend it's still good. If the borrower can't even pay the interest, the bank's next move is even more creative. They create more money out of nothing and lend that new money to the borrower.
Wait, they lend them more money?
So the borrower can use that new money to pay the interest on the old money.
That sounds circular.
It is. But look what happens. The bad loan stays on the books as a performing asset, and the bank now has an even larger loan on its books, generating even more interest income. What looked like a disaster becomes, quote, a major score for the bank.
That's incredible. So they profit from the default, in a way.
In a way, yes. They keep the game going. Now, this can only go on so long. Eventually, the interest payments become huge, maybe more than the borrower can possibly earn.
Then what?
Then comes the rescheduling play. The source uses this analogy. Imagine a football game where the team captains go to the referee and the commissioner and say, hey, let's extend the game. It's in the public interest. The spectators are having fun.
Okay.
And while everyone's distracted by the extended game, The parking lot attendants quietly removed the hubcaps from every car.
So the public, the spectators, they're being robbed while they're distracted.
That's the analogy. The American people are the spectators. They know that someone is stealing their hubcaps, the source says, but they think it is the greedy businessman who raises prices, or the selfish laborer who demands higher wages. They do not realize that these groups also are victimized by a monetary system which is constantly being eroded in value by and through the Federal Reserve System.
They blame each other, not the system creating the problem.
Exactly. And the source argues this insolvency isn't just an occasional problem, it's inherent in fractional reserve banking. Banks are often technically insolvent, but can keep operating as long as nobody notices, or as long as they can hide it with clever accounting.
What about the FDIC? Isn't that supposed to protect depositors?
Ah, the FDIC play. Yes, the FDIC guarantees deposits up to a certain amount. But the force calls this deceptive advertising.
Why deceptive?
Because true insurance tries to avoid moral hazard, where being insured makes you take bigger risks because you know you're covered.
Right, like driving more recklessly if you have great car insurance.
Sort of. Banks know they have this FDIC backstop, which might encourage riskier lending. Plus, the banks don't really pay for the FDIC insurance themselves. They pass the cost on to customers through fees and lower interest rates. And here's the kicker. If a bank does fail and the FDIC steps in, sure, the top management might get fired and the bank gets absorbed. But often, the people really in control, the major shareholders and top execs, they see the writing on the wall and sell their shares before the collapse.
So they get out unscathed.
Often, yes. The people who create the problem seldom suffer the economic consequences of their actions, the source states. The ultimate backstop isn't even the FDIC fund, it's the full faith and credit of the federal government.
Meaning the taxpayer.
Meaning the taxpayer is ultimately on the hook.
Okay, so the source provides examples of this bailout game in action.
Oh, plenty. Case studies that illustrate how it works, always framed as protecting the public, but really protecting the big players at public expense.
Like which ones?
Well, take Continental Illinois back in 1982. It was the 7th largest bank in the U.S. at the time. Huge assets.
I remember that one. Big news.
Huge. It got into trouble after making lots of risky loans, chasing high profits. Then it faced this massive global electronic bank run, foreign investors pulling their money out digitally super fast.
So what happened? How big was the intervention?
The intervention was enormous. The Fed stepped in with unlimited liquidity support, basically a blank check. By 1986, that support had reached over $9 billion.
$9 billion.
Yeah. And Fed Chairman Paul Volcker himself told Congress, quote, "The operation is the most basic function of the Federal Reserve. It was why it was founded."
He admitted it, that bailing out big banks was a core purpose.
That's how the source interprets his statement. It highlights this often unstated function. The Fed exists to rescue the big banks when their bets go wrong. And importantly, the source notes, small banks pay proportionally far more for their insurance and have far less chance of a Continental-style bailout. It's a two-tiered system.
So big banks get saved, small ones might not.
That's the pattern shown. And there are other examples. Chrysler in '79, Lockheed in '75, New York City itself in '75, First Pennsylvania Bank in '79. The list goes on.
And the common thread?
The common thread is that these bailouts were all made possible by the Federal Reserve System acting as the lender of last resort.
That phrase again.
Yeah. And that function, lending money created out of nothing, inevitably leads to inflation, which the source calls the confiscation of our nation's wealth through the hidden tax called inflation.
Okay, this connects to the housing market too, right? The savings and loan crisis.
Absolutely. The source argues that government intervention, starting with easy credit policies like the FHA, distorted the housing market. It pushed prices up, wiping out any real benefit for buyers, but voters kept supporting politicians who promised more easy credit.
And this led to problems for the S&Ls.
Big time. Many became insolvent.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really wild, the legal fraud. S&Ls, desperate to make up losses, started engaging in practices that weren't just legal, they were encouraged by the government.
How so?
Well, the Garn-St. Act allowed them to make loans based on appraised value, not actual market value.
So inflated appraisals.
You got it. This created fake appraised equity, which they could then use to attract more deposits, making these zombie S&Ls look healthy on paper. The source says the government basically told them, not only will we back you up if you fail, we'll show you exactly how to do it.
That's astounding.
It is. The fallout was catastrophic. The bailout costs ballooned. hitting estimates of over $150 billion in direct costs alone.
And the source sees the S&L industry itself as part of this larger system.
Yes, it calls the S&L industry a cartel within a cartel. It couldn't have existed in that form without Congress funneling money into it.
Okay.
And Congress couldn't have done that without the Fed, the main banking cartel, standing ready as the lender of last resort to create the money for Congress to borrow.
So it's a cozy relationship.
A comfortable arrangement between political scientists and monetary scientists, as the source puts it. It lets Congress vote for expensive schemes without raising direct taxes, because the cost is collected indirectly through inflation, which most voters don't understand.
And the total cost of the S&L mess, including that hidden inflation tax.
The source estimates it at over $1 trillion, paid for by the common man out of taxes and inflation. 4. Beyond national borders, building the New World Order.
Okay, this is where the narrative really expands. The source argues that these mechanisms creating money in the bailout game aren't just national phenomena. They extend globally as part of a much bigger, more ambitious project.
Yeah, this is where the idea of a New World Order comes in, driven by these financial forces.
So how do international institutions like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank fit into this picture? They seem like forces for global stability and development.
Well, that's their public image, certainly. The IMF, for instance, looks like it's part of the UN, just like the Fed looks like part of the U.S. government.
But it's not.
According to the source, no. It's entirely independent. It gets its funding from member nations, with the U.S. being the biggest contributor. Often, the source claims, other nations contribute basically worthless currencies.
And what was the goal behind setting up the IMF and World Bank?
At the Bretton Woods Conference, where they were designed, you had key figures like John Maynard Keynes,
Famous economist.
right, a Fabian socialist, the source notes,
Right.
and Harry Dexter White from the U.S. Treasury. Their vision, according to the source, included creating a world reserve currency, something Keynes called the Bancor. Yeah. The idea was to create a global currency not tied to gold, something that would free all governments from the discipline gold imposes. The IMF later created something called special drawing rights, or SDRs, which the source sees as a step towards fulfilling that dream.
So getting rid of the gold standard was key to this international plan.
Absolutely crucial, the source argues, for the IMF to become a true world central bank, able to issue unlimited currency. The dollar had to be disconnected from gold. That was seen as a first step toward replacing it completely with a banker and an SDR or something else equally free from restraint.
And the World Bank's role.
The World Bank acts as the IMF's lending agency. It presents itself as helping underdeveloped nations, alleviating poverty. It gives loans to governments, often at below market rates for very long terms, like 50 years.
Sounds good on the surface, humanitarian.
That's the pitch. But the source offers a starkly different take, arguing these experts actually caused the Third World debt crisis by lending vast sums for unproductive purposes. It cites analysis suggesting the IMF focuses on abstract macro policies, but ignores fundamental things like private property rights and free enterprise. It basically assumes any economic system can work if managed correctly, which leads to funding projects that are doomed to fail in the real world.
And this leads to worse outcomes.
Much worse, according to the source. It makes some truly shocking claims here. For instance, it alleges the Ethiopian famines in the 1980s weren't just a tragedy, but planned famines, modeled on Stalin's tactics.
Planned famines? That's horrifying.
It is. It also talks about how leaders and bureaucrats within these aid organizations often get rich fighting poverty. It gives the example of Tanzania. Received billions in loans, nationalized farms and industry, production collapsed, became dependent on imported food paid for by more foreign aid and World Bank loans, and ended up hopelessly in debt.
So the loans create dependency, not development.
That's the argument. Which brings us back to the game called bailout, now playing out on the world stage.
How does it work internationally?
The rules, as described, are pretty chilling. Step 1. Big commercial banks in developed countries, backed by their central banks like the Fed, create money from nothing and lend it at high interest rates to governments in underdeveloped nations. These are known to be risky loans.
Okay.
Step 2. When these risky loans inevitably start to default, which they often do, the IMF and the World Bank step in offering assistance. Bailout money.
The rescue.
But this rescue comes with strings attached. Big strings. They demand structural adjustment, meaning the country often has to surrender significant parts of its national sovereignty. control over its budget, its resources, its policies.
So the debt becomes a lever to exert control.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source posits a deliberate strategy here.
What kind of strategy?
The idea is that a strong nation is not likely to surrender its sovereignty. People in prosperous, stable countries aren't going to hand over their military or their courts to some world body.
Makes sense.
But the argument goes, if you can engineer a collapse of their economy and from a breakdown in civil order, if people are standing in breadlines, facing chaos, then they become more willing to give up sovereignty in return for assistance from the World Bank, the UN, and so on.
Create the crisis to offer the solution, which involves loss of independence.
That's the disturbing logic presented. And this is where you need to understand the code phrases.
What code phrases?
Yeah. Terms like monetary coordination mechanisms, or modern world economic order, or convergence of political values, or the big one, new world order. To most people, they sound benign, maybe even desirable.
Right. Who doesn't want coordination or order?
But to the insiders, the source claims these are code phrases which have a specific meaning: the termination of national sovereignty and the creation of world government.
Wow.
And as an example, it points to the Trilateral Commission, founded by David Rockefeller. Former Fed Chair Paul Volcker, who is also chairman of the TLC, is quoted as saying, "The standard of living of the average American has to decline."
He said that. Decline.
That's the quote provided. The source claims the TLC's goal is to build this new world order by gradually eroding national sovereignty piece by piece.
How?
Through economic and political unions, often pushed via trade treaties, think the EU, NAFTA, APEC, GATT. The source argues these treaties often have little to do with trade and are really about forcing convergence in domestic policies, regulations, labor laws, taxes, slowly making nations less independent.
Okay, beyond these big institutions, the source talks about something called the Rothschild formula. This sounds like a more direct strategy for gaining power.
Yes, it's presented as a very pragmatic, even cynical approach to global power, particularly linked to the Rothschild banking dynasty.
What is the formula?
In essence, it sees wars not just as tragedies, but as inevitable and, crucially, as highly profitable opportunities.
We're profiting from war.
Yes, by lending money or creating it out of nothing to finance wars. And the really cunning part, profiting from both sides of a conflict.
Funding both sides.
That's the core of the formula described. The Rothschild fortune itself exploded, the source says, after they adopted fractional reserve banking and then expanded internationally with Mayer Rothschild's 5 sons setting up branches across Europe.
Creating an international network.
A hugely powerful one. They became, the source claims, immensely more powerful than any financial empire that had ever preceded it. They had vast wealth, they were international, independent, operating behind the scenes secretly, like a fifth estate accountable to no one. Governments feared them because they couldn't control them.
Okay, how was this formula applied in history?
World War I is given as a prime example. England and France were massively in debt. They chose J.P. Morgan and Company, who the source identifies as partners of the Rothschilds, as their agent to sell war bonds in the U.S. and to buy war supplies.
So Morgan profited coming and going.
Exactly, from both ends of the cash flow. But then German U-boats started sinking ships, threatening an Allied defeat. Bond sales dried up. Suddenly, Morgan's profits and the huge loans already made to the Allies were at serious risk.
So they had a vested interest in the Allies winning.
A massive financial interest. And the source strongly suggests that the push for the U.S. to enter WWI, led by the Wilson administration, was heavily influenced by these American bankers needing to protect their investments in an Allied victory.
That brings us to the Lusitania incident. The source presents this as a deliberate provocation, right?
A very chilling illustration of the formula, yes. The Lusitania wasn't just a passenger liner. It competed with Morgan's shipping interests, was built to military specs, and registered as an armed auxiliary cruiser.
Okay.
And the source states flatly that when it left New York, loaded with passengers, it was also carrying contraband war materials from the United States. It was virtually a floating ammunition depot.
Wow. And what happened when it reached dangerous waters?
This is the truly disturbing part, according to the source. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, allegedly ordered the ship's naval escort, the Juno, to abandon it.
Left it unprotected.
Yes. And ordered the Lusitania to reduce speed, making it a sitting duck for German U-boats. Now, the German embassy had tried to warn American passengers not to sail on the Lusitania, placing ads in New York papers. But the U.S. State Department intervened and prevented most papers from printing the warning, ensuring Americans would be on board.
So it was set up.
That's the strong implication.
Mm.
One German torpedo hit, and then witnesses reported a mighty second explosion from within ripped her apart. Divers later reportedly confirmed a massive internal damage near the bow, consistent with munitions exploding.
And the purpose.
Coldly calculated, the source argues, sacrificing the ship and its passengers, including 195 Americans, to create the outrage needed to draw the United States into the war. That tragedy provided the proper emotional climate to overcome American reluctance to join the fight.
That's a deeply unsettling interpretation of history. Does the formula apply elsewhere?
The source argues it applies significantly to the Russian Revolution as well. It demolishes the popular myth of a spontaneous workers' uprising.
What does it say really happened?
It argues the planning, the leadership, and especially the financing came entirely from outside Russia, mostly from financiers in Germany, Britain, and the United States. The Rothschild formula was apparently at play.
Financiers backed the Bolsheviks.
Yes. Figures like Lord Alfred Milner, head of a powerful British secret society, reportedly provided millions. American financiers, too, like William Boyce Thompson, who was a Federal Reserve director and a Morgan Chase partner, allegedly financed both the provisional government and the Bolsheviks.
Why both?
The motivation wasn't ideology, the source claims, but purely business. The capturing of the post-war Russian market, securing access, no matter who won.
So it's always about profit and control.
That's the consistent theme. This leads to another really provocative concept the source explores. The best enemy money can buy.
Meaning
Meaning that sometimes having a powerful enemy is actually profitable and strategically useful for those applying the formula.
how does that work?
Well, it points out that German industry, including giants like IG Farben, which later funded Hitler and used slave labor, was heavily financed by American and British bankers in the lead-up to WWII. Even Rockefeller's PR guy, Ivy Lee, helped improve Hitler's image in the U.S. after having done PR for the Soviets earlier.
So building up potential adversaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, during the Cold War, the source makes the absolutely staggering claim that, quote, the guns, the ammunition, the weapons, and the transportation systems that killed Americans in Korea and Vietnam came from the American-subsidized economy of the Soviet Union.
Wait, American money helped build the Soviet war machine that killed American soldiers?
That is the direct, explosive claim made in the source material. It details how U.S. banks, often with taxpayer guarantees, financed Soviet projects like the Kama River truck plant, which then built military vehicles used against U.S. interests. It argues the U.S. essentially subsidized its own enemy.
Why would they do that?
To maintain the conflict, the source suggests. It even quotes a strategic assessment about the Middle East. If Saddam Hussein did not exist, we would have to invent him. Maintaining a long-term American presence in the Gulf would be difficult in the absence of a regional threat.
So enemies are necessary to justify military spending and foreign intervention, which benefits the complex.
That's the chilling logic of the best enemy money can buy and the Rothschild formula as presented here. Which brings us back to the Fed. The fifth reason the source gives for abolishing the Federal Reserve is that it encourages war.
How?
Because modern large-scale warfare is incredibly expensive. Governments couldn't afford it if they had to rely only on direct taxation. People would revolt. But the Fed, through the Mandrake mechanism, allows the government to finance wars by creating money out of nothing, essentially borrowing from the future via inflation.
The hidden tax pays for the wars.
It's exactly. The source argues most major wars since the Fed's creation would have been greatly reduced in severity, or perhaps not even fought at all, without this ability to create fiat money. Central banking, it concludes, makes modern war possible. V, the long view. Cycles, control, and a glimpse of the future.
Okay, let's talk about economic cycles. Booms and busts. We tend to think of them as just natural parts of capitalism, right? Unavoidable ups and downs.
That's the common understanding, yeah.
But our source takes this a huge step further. It suggests these cycles aren't always natural, they can actually be engineered, and that certain groups profit immensely from them, especially the busts.
That's right. It's a very controversial claim, but central to the book's thesis. It argues that the booms and busts after the Civil War, for example, weren't random. They were directly caused by the government and banks creating fiat money, like greenbacks, and then deliberately contracting the money supply later.
And someone profited?
J.P. Morgan and Company, working closely with London financiers, allegedly profited hugely from these engineered swings, especially the downturns when assets could be bought cheap.
Is there a more modern example?
A stark one given is the agricultural depression of 1920-21. The source gives it this provocative nickname, Country Duck Dinner in New York. meaning the country banks and farmers were the ducks served up for the big city bankers. This depression was triggered, the source says, by a deliberate and violent contraction of credit by the Federal Reserve starting in May 1920.
What was the impact?
Massive. A $15 billion drop in national production. Huge money back then. Millions thrown out of work. A $20 billion loss in farmland value. Farmers and the smaller country banks that served them were absolutely devastated, wiped out.
But the big city banks?
They were supported by the Fed, got liquidity, and weathered the storm much better. The source presents it as a calculated move to consolidate power in the hands of the big Wall Street banks.
How does the Fed engineer these expansions and contractions? You mentioned the Mandrake mechanism.
Right. The Fed has a few tools, but buying and selling government debt securities in the open market is the big one. Buying injects money, selling withdraws it. Another key tool, especially back then, was the discount window.
How does that work?
Banks could go to the Fed and basically pledge their existing loans as collateral to get newly created reserves from the Fed.
So they turned old loans into new base money.
Exactly. And here's the magic multiplier. Each dollar of new reserves the bank got from the Fed could then be used to create up to $9 more in new loans checkbook money.
Wow, a 9-to-1 expansion.
Or even more, because those new loans could then potentially be used as collateral for more reserves. The source describes it like music going round and round, potentially expanding the initial reserve injection by about 28 times through this process.
That's incredible leverage.
Huge. And this discounting process was a major way the Fed flooded the nation with new money in the run-up to the 1929 crash.
And this connects to government debt.
Absolutely. Think about all the debt from World War I, sold as war bonds. The government didn't pay those bonds off when they matured.
They rolled them over, issued new bonds to pay off the old ones.
Exactly. Why? Because, the source argues, those government bonds had become a key part of the reserves backing the money supply under the Fed system. Redeeming the bonds, paying off the debt, would have shrunk the money supply dramatically.
So the debt has to keep growing to support the money supply.
That's the trap. The Federal Reserve System, the source claims, has virtually locked our nation into perpetual debt. It can't be paid off without causing a massive deflationary collapse.
Okay, let's talk about the big one, the 1929 stock market crash. How does the source explain that? Was it engineered too?
It's a bit more nuanced here. The source compares the wild speculation of the Roaring '20s to historical bubbles like tulip mania, driven by easy money from the Fed and people buying stocks on margin, borrowing most of the purchase price.
The greater fool theory. Buy high, assuming a bigger fool will buy it even higher.
Right. Now, did the Fed plan the crash itself for profit? The source suggests maybe not deliberately planned from the start. It quotes Andrew Mellon, Treasury Secretary then, believing a crash would be good to purge the rottenness out of the system.
A necessary correction.
That was his view. And it also mentions Montague Norman, head of the Bank of England, telling someone in early 1929 that a big shakeout was coming in the U.S. market, months before it happened. So they saw it coming.
Okay, so if they didn't necessarily plan it from day one, did they use it?
That's the key distinction the source makes. It says there's evidence the monetary scientists actually tried to prevent the crash, but other priorities got in the way. However, once they realized a crash was inevitable, they were not bashful about using it to their advantage.
What's the evidence for that?
Insider warnings. The source describes a secret meeting between Fed officials and the Bank of England in February 1929. Immediately after that meeting, powerful financiers apparently sent out advisory warnings to lists of preferred customers, wealthy industrialists, prominent politicians, and high officials in foreign governments to get out of the stock market.
They warned the insiders.
That's the claim, while at the same time the public was being reassured that the economy was fundamentally sound. Buy stocks.
So the insiders sold high.
Exactly. Then in August 1929, the Fed applied the pin to the bubble. They raised interest rates, the discount rate, and started selling securities, pulling money out of the system. Broker loan rates shot up to 20%.
Squeezing the credit.
Hard. And then October 29th, Black Tuesday. The market collapsed. Thousands of investors were wiped out.
But the insiders who got the warning,
they were sitting on cash, and now, with prices plummeting, they became the buyers. The source contends that some of the greatest fortunes in America were made in that fashion, buying assets for pennies on the dollar from desperate sellers.
A massive transfer of wealth, facilitated by inside knowledge and Fed actions.
That's the picture painted, and the aftermath. Hoover, then FDR, launched government programs and banking reforms. But the source argues these reforms actually extended the Fed's power, using the crisis they helped create, or at least manage for insider benefit, to justify even more centralized control over money.
Okay, connecting this to the bigger picture again. Where does the source see all this leading? It presents a pretty bleak outlook, right? A pessimistic scenario.
Extremely bleak. It projects a future based on current trends where living standards for ordinary people continue to decline, taxes keep rising, it mentions 40% plus just for federal income tax, net worth falls, leisure time shrinks, poverty increases.
And this isn't just bad luck or bad policy.
No. The source argues forcefully, none of this is accidental. It is the fulfillment of a plan to bring them industrialized nations into a world government built upon the principles of socialism, with themselves in control.
A plan declined to enable world government.
That's the chilling assertion. And it traces the origins of some of these control strategies back to a controversial think tank study from 1966 called The Report from Iron Mountain.
Iron Mountain, what was that about?
It was supposedly a top-secret government-sponsored study, initially dismissed as a hoax, but later figures like economist John Kenneth Galbraith hinted it might have been real. Its purpose was to figure out how government could maintain power and control citizens if war, which had always been the primary method, was no longer an option, perhaps due to world government or nuclear stalemate.
So they needed substitutes for war.
Exactly. The report apparently analyzed various possibilities, things like intensifying competitive sports, blood games, or creating a believable threat from outer space and alien invasion. The source even suggests some UFO incidents might have been early experiments with this idea.
Wow. Okay. What was the most promising substitute?
The environmental pollution model.
Climate change. Environmental crisis.
That seems to be the implication. This was seen as ideal because, one, it could be linked to things people could actually see, like smog or polluted water, making it believable.
Okay.
Two, it allowed for terrifying end-of-Earth scenarios that could frighten people into accepting drastic measures, and importantly, quote, accuracy in these predictions would not be important. Just the fear was needed.
Fear as a tool of control, replacing fear of war.
Precisely. A global battle against pollution could justify global controls, taxes, regulations, surveillance, everything war used to justify.
And this connects to waste. How?
The source links this directly to George Orwell's 1984. Orwell wrote that the essential act of war is destruction of the products of human labor. War keeps the masses from becoming too comfortable, too prosperous, and therefore potentially too intelligent and rebellious.
So war creates scarcity and dependence.
Yes. And the source concludes from this that, in the modern context, massive waste in government spending is not an unfortunate byproduct, it is the goal. Intentionally wasting resources prevents the general standard of living from rising too high, keeping people compliant.
That's a deeply cynical view of government spending.
It is. And it gets darker. It touches on population control as another aspect of this elite planning. It quotes philosopher Bertrand Russell writing about the need to limit population, even suggesting chillingly that perhaps bacteriological war may prove more effective. If a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full.
Good heavens, that's extreme.
Extremely. And it connects this mindset to figures like Maurice Strong, a key UN environmental figure, who reportedly believed that affluent nations must lower their standard of living to save the planet. The implication is that humanity itself, or at least the masses, are seen as the problem to be managed and controlled by an elite.
Okay, so how does this pessimistic future scenario actually play out? The source describes a kind of hypothetical sequence of events.
Yes, it paints a scenario starting with, predictably, a major banking crisis. Banks face huge runs. They can't possibly meet withdrawals for more than maybe 48 hours.
Panic?
Total panic.
Yeah.
But the Fed steps in immediately. Unlimited funding. Printing presses, running 247. Armored trucks, delivering cash just to create the visual of solvency.
Trying to restore confidence.
Right. Meanwhile, Congress quickly authorizes massive loans. Just Fed-created money for bailouts, both domestic and international, especially to make sure foreign countries can keep paying interest on their debts to the big banks.
So another huge bailout, bigger than ever. What are the consequences in this scenario?
Dire. About 10 months later, the effects of all that money creation hit hard. Inflation becomes institutionalized, maybe starting at only 5% a year, but it's compounding. The dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency. Trillions of dollars held overseas come flooding back into the U.S.
Driving prices sky high.
Hyperinflation. Commerce breaks down. Barter becomes common. Chaos.
And out of this chaos
Comes the police state.
Yeah.
A national emergency is declared. Martial law. FEMA gets sweeping powers to detain people, relocate populations. Order must be restored, you see.
At any cost.
At any cost to freedom. And then a new world monetary unit is introduced, trained like the Bancor. Keynes' old idea finally realized. The Federal Reserve formally becomes just a branch office of the IMF, which is now the world's central bank.
Global financial control.
Achieved. And as part of the deal, large tracts of U.S. land are placed under UN supervision as debt for nature swaps, payment for the international bailout money.
So, loss of financial and territorial sovereignty?
Complete loss. Society is reduced to what the source calls automatons of misery, a kind of high-tech feudalism where inflation is permanent, business cycles are eliminated through total government control, but everyone is poorer and less free. It quotes de Tocqueville. The forehorse of this frightful team is public debt. Taxation follows that, and in its train, wretchedness and oppression.
And education plays a role in maintaining this.
A crucial one. It cites a 1904 report from Rockefeller's General Education Board, claiming its goal wasn't really to uplift people, but to promote collectivism and internationalism, and create passive and submissive citizens people, educated enough for productive work under supervision, but not enough to question authority or seek to rise above their class. Real critical thinking reserved for the elites.
A system designed to perpetuate itself through indoctrination.
That's the grim picture. And finally, war isn't totally gone. It's occasionally engineered, maybe smaller scale, disguised as peacekeeping operations, just to keep the fear levels up and justify the controls. War remains a necessity for the stabilization of society. A realistic scenario. The path to reversal.
Okay, that pessimistic scenario is incredibly bleak. Almost makes you want to give up, but the source doesn't end there, does it? It pivots. It asks, is this future inevitable? Is there another path?
Exactly. After painting that really dark picture, it asks, essentially, is there a way out? And it proposes what it calls a realistic scenario.
Yeah.
Not necessarily easy, but possible.
So, what's the basis for this hope, given the power structures described?
It acknowledges the problem.
Hmm.
It talks about the deep influence of groups like the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, over government, media, education. This leads, understandably, to a lot of cynicism and apathy. People feel powerless.
Yeah, you can see why.
But it makes a really powerful counterargument. The power to reverse the present trend rests in the hands of only 535 people.
Meaning?
The members of the U.S. Congress. 100 senators, 435 representatives. Constitutionally, they still hold the ultimate power over the monetary system if they choose to exercise it.
Okay, so the power theoretically lies with Congress. What should Congress do, according to the source? Just reform the Fed, regulate it better.
No, the source is much more radical than that. It dismisses most common reform proposals as ineffective or even counterproductive.
Like what?
Like just turning the Fed over to be a direct government agency, like the post office. It says the structure isn't the main issue, the function is. Or a balanced budget amendment, it calls that an illusion and a fraud. That would just give Congress an excuse to raise taxes instead of cutting spending or changing the money system.
What about auditing the Fed? That's a popular idea.
The source dismisses that too, surprisingly. Not because an audit wouldn't find things, but because it sees it as an excuse to delay serious action. A distraction. It states flatly. We do not need a bill to audit the Fed. We need one to abolish it.
Abolish the Fed entirely. Wow.
That's the core proposal. Get rid of it. And the solution, it argues, is to go back to restoring constitutional money.
Meaning gold and silver.
Exactly. Return to the system the Founding Fathers intended. A monetary system based on tangible assets, gold and silver, free from government manipulation, and the ability to create money out of nothing.
And the source emphasizes the founders were really clear about this, right? Based on their own bad experiences.
Extremely clear. It points out that every one of them could remember from his personal experience the utter chaos in the colonies caused by the issuance of fiat money, like the continental dollar, which became worthless. That direct, negative experience is why they explicitly voted against giving the federal government the power to issue bills of credit, paper money, in the Constitution itself.
They knew the danger.
They knew it intimately. Thomas Jefferson is quoted describing inflation, the result of fiat money, as the most oppressive of all taxes, because it's hidden and falls hardest on the poor and those on fixed incomes. The source also highlights how quickly the U.S. economy recovered after the Revolution once they returned to sound money, to gold and silver coin. Trade boomed, production increased, prosperity returned. The lesson, it says, is that economies can heal quickly if government just gets out of the way and allows honest money.
Okay, so abolish the Fed, return to gold and silver. How would that actually work? The source lays out specific steps.
Yes, it proposes a concrete step-by-step plan. It's ambitious, but detailed.
Let's hear it.
Step 1. Abolish the Federal Reserve System. Just end it.
All right.
Step 2. Have the U.S. Treasury issue new currency directly, fully backed by gold and silver held in Treasury vaults. Replace the fiat Federal Reserve notes with real, redeemable dollars.
Back to honest money.
Step 3. Balance the federal budget and drastically cut spending. You have to stop the government borrowing that necessitates money creation.
Fiscal discipline.
Essential. Step 4. Repeal all laws restricting private ownership of gold. Let people own gold freely again.
Restore property rights.
Step 5. Return the government's gold and silver supply to the people. The source argues this metal was essentially paid for by the people through taxes and inflation, so it belongs to them, not the government, to back their currency.
Okay.
Step 6. Determine the total value of all that precious metal in the Treasury and count up exactly how many Federal Reserve notes are out there in circulation.
Get an inventory.
Right. Step 7. Redeem all outstanding Federal Reserve notes. Exchange them for the new Treasury dollars at a fixed ratio, calculated based on the total metal value divided by the number of old notes. This ensures every old note can be exchanged for a specific amount of gold, silver-backed currency.
A conversion process.
Yes. Step 8. Convert all existing contracts, mortgages, bonds, everything denominated in old dollars into the new real dollar value using that same exchange ratio. This is crucial for fairness, ensuring that debts and assets are honestly matched in the new system. No one gets cheated by the conversion.
Prevents chaos during the switch.
Exactly. And finally, step 9. Reform the banking system fundamentally. Make a clear legal distinction between demand deposits, money you park in the bank for safekeeping, like a warehouse receipt. It stays in the vault, earns no interest, you pay a fee. And time deposits, money you genuinely lend to the bank for a fixed period for them to invest. It earns interest, but isn't available on demand.
What does that achieve?
It ends fractional reserve banking for demand deposits. Banks could only lend out money they actually received as time deposits. It stops the banking system itself from creating money out of nothing.
A huge change.
A fundamental change, back to what the source considers honest banking.
So that's the plan, abolition and restoration. Does the source think this is actually achievable, given the forces arrayed against it?
It concludes on a note of, well, realistic optimism. It emphasizes that reversing these powerful trends is possible, but it won't happen on its own. It requires determined individual action.
What kind of action?
First, become self-informed. Really study these issues, read the books, attend seminars, understand it deeply yourself.
Educate yourself.
Yes. Then become a pamphleteer in the modern sense. Share what you've learned, talk to friends, family, build a mailing list, use social media, spread the information to people who are receptive.
Spread awareness.
Third, join with others. Find like-minded groups. There's strength in numbers. Coordinate effort. And finally, get involved politically, but smartly. Support candidates who are genuinely independent of party control. And the source gives a crucial warning here. Never let loyalty to a political party override loyalty to principle, because the major parties themselves are often controlled by the very system you're trying to change. Stay independent so your efforts aren't co-opted.
Principle over party, a call to informed, independent action.
That's the final message. It's possible, but it requires citizens to wake up, understand the game, and take deliberate action to change the rules.
Outro.
Well, we have certainly taken a deep dive today, right into the heart of the money system, uncovering its very secret origins, exploring this idea of the grand illusion of fiat currency, looking at the historical pattern of booms, busts, bailouts, maybe engineered, maybe just exploited,
Right.
and the incredibly powerful forces that the source claims are shaping our economic destiny, often behind the scenes. We've really seen how the creature, as the source calls it, may have swallowed Congress, and how these hidden mechanisms impact your money, your purchasing power every single day. Yeah. And what's truly fascinating, I think, the real aha moment, is grasping that inflation isn't just prices going up. It's a hidden tax.
A confiscation of wealth.
Exactly, a quiet theft. And understanding how the Fed's role as lender of last resort actually enables this endless creation of money from nothing. Often, as we heard, for purposes that seem very far removed from the public interest, serving a private agenda instead.
It really reframes things. So here's a final provocative thought for you, our listener, drawn from the source material. The author warns that if current trends continue, quote, after working 45 years, the hidden tax on those dollars will be 90%.
90%.
90% of your lifetime savings potentially wiped out by inflation. Think about that. What does that imply for your savings, your retirement, your future, and ultimately your freedom? And maybe more importantly, what might you do with this knowledge now that you've had this glimpse behind the curtain at the creature?
That's something to definitely mull over.
Indeed. Join us next time on The Deep Dive as we continue to explore the hidden forces that shape our world.